talk about girls and diagnoses. Is that something you want to talk about today? Is that
To say too, and I have written on it a bit, because it took me until I was like 50 before I got a diagnosis. When I look back on my life, I think so much about how much easier it would have been if I'd known, if there was reasons behind all these bewildering mysteries of why I failed at so much stuff and why I struggled so hard when I was younger. And, I know it's a lot easier now, so much easier, and there's so much more information for kids, but girls are still getting missed. Girls are still diagnosed at a rate of, 1 for every 4 boys that are getting diagnosed. And you've got to know that they're out there. It's not because there are fewer autistic girls. They're out there. They just can handle the social aspects a little better. They mask better. They know how to sort of fit in. They've done actually functional MRIs on autistic girls to show that they are aware of the social differences, even if they don't know how to, remedy any deficiencies there. They're aware of social issues much more than boys are. And usually they can they try to blend in, they try to fit in. And also girls, their special interests are more socially acceptable special interests. So they get missed there too, For girls, just for me as an example, when I was a kid, Barbies, I could care less about Barbie dolls, but I could line up those Barbie shoes and make, I would make mandalas and designs out of different Barbie shoes and things, or just creating order out of them, creating order out of the toys.
that is a very girl thing to do. So that would not be, yeah.
Right.
Girls are supposed to cook and clean, right? So lining things up.
Yeah. So, you're organizing things on the little tiny hangers, the little tiny doll clothes and everything. I could care less about the dolls, Or I remember having a carriage, a little doll carriage. And again, I could care less about the doll, but I love wheeling the carriage around and around and around and around and around and around. And just over
but
and
since
over.
it was a carriage, it was, yeah.
And little things that, of course, there was no way for my mom to ever pick up on that stuff, and she never did. But they were clues, and it was really hard for me growing up. So I just feel really a lot like I just hope that, we can be sensitive to the different ways that girls display their neurodivergences. And oftentimes it's not the autism that shows, it's the social anxiety, the extreme shyness, and the general anxiety for everything.
Feeling sick, not wanting to go to school. I can remember that. I don't know how often I used to crawl in bed with my mom in the morning and say, I don't feel good today. Can I stay home from school? I can't. I think it was just like an everyday occurrence. And it was the anxiety. It was like the bed is so safe and let's just stay here for the day. Yeah.
I so hear you, Megan. I was the same kind of kid. And it was because of sensory overload, but I had no way to articulate that the world was just way too intense and scary and too much, and it was just too muchness, and I couldn't deal with it, and I needed to stay home 1 day out of 5 just to make it through. But who had words for that back then? And even today, oftentimes we just say, oh, she's so shy. She's so shy. She's too much of a perfection.
Or drama, yeah, or the drama queen.
Right, and yeah. So anyway, they're all just little ways to maybe be a little more sensitive and look in and think, well, maybe there's something else going on.
And it's also, I get that question a lot around, we have a huge community around us, and there's a lot of parents that have girls, and they're like, I'm listening to the autistic community. I'm pretty sure that my daughter is autistic. Who can I take her to get the diagnosis? And I do not have an answer for that, because so many of those people that diagnose, they tend to diagnose girls with anything else except autism. And it's as if autism is this boogeyman. Like if they give this autism diagnosis, it's like well, we don't want to give it too early if if there's any hope that she's not. And I think that
Yeah.
it's a disservice to those girls. I mean, if they're autistic, they're autistic, and you know
Right.
they need that support that autistic kids need. And I mean, they'll diagnose them with depression. They'll diagnose them with not even ADHD still. I mean,
Yeah.
I
And then
was not diagnosed with ADHD until I was over 20. And, depression, the eating disorders, the bipolar, and not saying that they're misdiagnosing them with bipolar, but I've spoken with a woman who did guest posts for my blog, and she was diagnosed with everything under the sun.
Mhm.
She was autistic. And
Yeah,
when she learned that, it was like I wasn't depressed. I was burnt out, and I didn't have any
exactly.
support that I needed.
So many of the other things, the depression, the anxiety, the eating disorders, autistic girls have such a higher rate of eating disorder.
The control,
But they all, the underlying base of all of that is the different neurology of autism. And that's what's getting missed. They're picking up on almost the symptoms. Of course you're going to be anxious. Of course you're going to be depressed. But that's not the main diagnosis. The main underlying base diagnosis reason could be autism. So, yeah.
Angelina says, I'm remembering and realizing things from my childhood and adolescence just listening to this conversation. I mean, and it wasn't like a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't a thing in the 80s. I mean, I didn't know anybody that was autistic.
No. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my mom volunteered to help with an autistic boy as part of her volunteer group. They would help massage him, and do some touch therapy. So, she knew, my mom knew what autism was, but I didn't look like what autism was to her.
Right.
So, yeah, so it's, things have changed. They definitely have changed, but I'm not sure if they've changed enough yet for girls. So that's why I keep speaking up for it. I think the diagnostic criteria was still written with boys in mind. And I'm just afraid we're missing girls. And I want us to just be aware.
Absolutely.